Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. We are live today on Newsflash. We thank you so much for joining us here. And we have some breaking news. The Supreme Court has struck down a Louisiana abortion restriction as the case over a state law requiring doctors performing abortions to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals is the first abortion ruling since these two brand new appointees, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, joined the Supreme Court. Also, we'll take a look at New York City, and it's really time to admit that the city and its leaders, and the state's leaders for that matter, helped cause this catastrophe. Also, I will weigh in on what's coming with George Floyd and the protests in the future, and Iran issues a murder and terrorism arrest warrant for Donald Trump over his assassination of Qasem Soleimani, and we'll take a look at what is to come of that and what severity that decree shall bring. But first, we take a look at the breaking news here in our own country about the Supreme Court. On Monday, they struck down a Louisiana law that could have left the state with a single abortion clinic, as the vote was 5-4, with Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. voting with the court's four-member liberal wing and not adopting its reasoning. The Chief Justice said respect for the precedent compelled him to vote with majority. So yeah, again, we keep getting these warnings. We keep getting these little Supreme Court like kind of gifts and droppings from John Roberts about how, I probably would have. I do really agree with what this case is trying to bring, but the fact is there's a president or the Trump campaign made a kind of crappy legal case for it so bad that I couldn't even begin to consider it as a real thing. Like, that was what happened last time with the gay marriage case. Like, we cannot rely on John Roberts to protect us from all the court's evils, so there will be a time, and of course, you have to consider this when we're dealing with, like, really what the Supreme Court brings, is the fact is there will be a time when the Supreme Court is going to bring horrible damage on the generations to come here in this country, for generations to come, and that's what the reality is going to be. And if we don't really start to kind of prepare for that, we're going to get like really, as the left, we're going to be very much in for a rude awakening. The Louisiana law, which was enacted in 2014, requires doctors performing abortion to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. The law supporters said the law protects the health and safety of the women seeking abortions, and that requirement for obtaining admitting privileges helps ensure the competence of doctors. Opponents disputed that, saying that hospitalizations for abortions or after abortions are rare. The women would receive medical care at hospitals whether doctors had admitting privileges or not, and that the abortion providers are often unable to obtain admitting privileges for reasons unrelated to their competence. So that's a pretty important thing. Like, that is I think that's really kind of the pretty important thing about admitting privileges, and like they're very, very hard to get, and really they're most of the time not necessary, because this is the tried and true truth about abortions. It's like when they're made legal, they're often a lot safer for everybody involved. When they're made illegal, they'll still happen anyway, but they just won't be. There'll be a lot more murder. There'll be a lot more death that these supposedly pro-life conservatives are not going to want to see happen. I mean, again, if they truly are indeed as pro-life as they say. So, yeah, in June, Medical Services v. Russo, the court ruled 5-4 that a Louisiana law violated the Constitution when it required doctors performing abortions to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. So the group voting there was Sonia Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in the rare social justice case that she actually chose to side with the left on this. Thank you, Ruth. All hail Queen RBG. Elena Kagan, Stephen Breyer, and Roberts went over. And of course, the conservative bloc, only Roberts went over, and Kavanaugh, Alito, and Gorsuch and Thomas all supported the now thrown out law. So, where the public stands on this issue, I think it's kind of an interesting matter. States requiring abortions providers to have admitting privileges does violate women's constitutional rights. They say 57% of everybody says it does violate a women's constitutional rights. So they all kind of agree with the liberal bloc of the country, 57%. 73% of Democrats agree with the Supreme Court's liberal bloc, 56% of independents, 39% of Republicans. So you can kind of see the question wording on that there as well. And so that's kind of a breakdown of where the public stands and where the Supreme Court stands. So it is pretty much like in this case, the Supreme Court actually did reflect and represent the country, which is good because that is what it is technically democratically supposed to do. So the thing here is only 2 of the 5 doctors that provide abortions in Louisiana have obtained admitting privileges, 1 in New Orleans and 1 in Shreveport. But the Shreveport doctor testified that he could not handle the clinic's work alone. If the law went into effect, a trial judge concluded there will be a single doctor in a single clinic in New Orleans available to provide abortions for all of Louisiana. It would not be a very good situation for anybody who's like legitimately trying to get an abortion. If they had an awful thing happen to them or something like that, it would be very, very tough. So the judge, John W. D. Graveles of the Federal District Court of Baton Rouge, struck down the Louisiana law in 2017, saying it created an undue burden on the women's constitutional right to abortion. The experience of the clinic in Shreveport Hope Medical Group for Women showed, he wrote, that the law was a solution in search of a problem. So not trying to kind of make a conclusion based on so and just trying to jump to that conclusion of women, these doctors need to have these kind of visiting privileges. Again, that's the game that the right has been playing for all these years when it comes to abortions. Like, what we just have to find the right case that and just create as much legal barriers for women and just kind of use it and wiggle it around the constitutional side of thing. So it is like that is the tough part of it. So in these last 23 years, Hope Clinic, which serves in excess of 3,000 patients per year, had only 4 patients who required transferred to a hospital for treatment. In each instance, regardless of whether the physician had admitting privileges, the patient received appropriate care. So it really proves here that admitting privileges are just not really relevant to the care that the person receives in the situation. So it is kind of really irrelevant to what goes on here. So the law that Judge Graveles ruled was essentially identical to the one from Texas that the Supreme Court struck down in 2016, Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt, where Justice Stephen G. Breyer, writing for the majority of that decision, said courts must consider whether the benefits claimed for laws that put restrictions on abortion outweigh the burdens they put on the constitutional right to the procedure. So there is being obviously clearly a lot of burdens. If they're just judging on the situation here in Louisiana, it would have been an awful situation for any woman trying to come in and get an abortion here. It would just have been a hugely difficult process, and that is what we see in this situation. All right, we will now move on, and coming up on the other side of this, we will be talking about the coronavirus in New York. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there, a lot of debate about how the leaders handled it. I've been very critical of New York for a long time, and I want to break down an article that is also critical of New York and just get their case from it coming up. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for listening to programming from the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. It really means a lot. So if you like what you're hearing, please consider supporting us by checking out our merch store available on Spreaker.com/TSWS. The link for it is there. Also, if you like what you're hearing, feel free to leave us a review on wherever or however you listen. You can do it on Spreaker by leaving a positive comment, and of course on iTunes by rating and reviewing us 5 stars, and on whatever possible program or site that you listen to SWRN on, leave a nice review, leave a good comment, let us know your feedback. And also, if it's negative too, I always welcome constructive feedback. Thank you so much for listening, and now let's get back to your show. You are listening to Newsflash, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We got a little chill music here, just giving it a peek of what's still to come on the show. We're taking a look at the blood on New York's hands on the coronavirus, what's next for the George Floyd protests, and Iran issuing a rather crazy, or actually maybe not so crazy, murder and terrorism arrest warrant for Trump over his Qasem Soleimani assassination. Remember that back in the very beginning of the year, a very, very crazy situation. So we will bring that to you. So, but we do start with the New York. This is Jack Crosby talking about this in Discourse blog. At the end of May, when the virus was at its worst, I watched a bunch of paramedics in hazmat suits tromp into the building next to mine and come out with a body on a gurney. They left lights flashing, most likely to pick up the next body in the list of over 21,000 people who have died in New York from the coronavirus. They left the body behind because there was nothing else they could do. As they were getting ready to leave, a team of National Guard soldiers showed up in a Hyundai hatchback and loaded the body bag into a white van leased from a Tulsa, Oklahoma-based vehicle rental company. Then it drove away, and I went to bed, is what he says. So, now a month later, the worst of New York City's outbreak appears to be over and the city is starting to open back up. What that means is unclear to me, he writes. If I want to, I can go to a bar and a restaurant tonight and sit outside and drink a glass of wine and order an appetizer. If my table is a little ways off from the restaurant's other tables as it's supposed to be, I could take my mask off and probably be fine. I don't remember specifically the last time I went to a restaurant and sat down and ordered a meal, but I think it was at some point in early March. At that point, we thought everything was pretty much fine. I took the subway to the martial arts gym I used to go to on March 8th or 9th. Saw a few people wearing masks. The gym had a huge thing of hand sanitizer by the door, so I figured it was mostly okay. You remember that time, the time where we all thought, it'll just be a thing. It just happens, and it'll go by eventually. It won't be as big a deal. But yeah, we really see that going on. A full week later, Mayor Bill de Blasio went on TV. A full week later, March 8th, if you remember that, he went on TV and he told that everyone just go out to the bars. He held a media availability about that. He said, let's get our team in here. So I declared a state of emergency in New York City. At that time, I said the situation was going to grow more difficult. It is quite clear the situation is growing intensely. So yeah, little did he know here. So yeah, it was not okay. Shouldn't have gone to the gym that day. My girlfriend should not have gone to a birthday brunch for one of her friends that weekend. It turned out that one guy there who had COVID, and we didn't find out until later. Other people who were there later went to Florida or Michigan and a couple of places that I forgot. I figured it wasn't my business, just the personal choices that people make, even though we now know that those choices made either in ignorance or arrogance and enabled by the utter negligence of our leadership have killed thousands of people. And I think it is really kind of interesting, the jump that we see happening from the placement of blame. Because the leaders, right now, what our leaders are really trying to do is place the blame on us for following the guidelines that we follow. You largely see that when people are told to follow the guidelines, they are following the guidelines. They do not want to get sick. But the fact is that we're driven by the fact that the small few people in the Republican Party have politicized the act of wearing a mask in and of itself. And there has been a whole kind of political school of thought in the Republican Party of now trying to just make masks be more and more of kind of a political thing. There's a whole spate of people and guidelines being relaxed, and people saying that we don't need to wear the guidelines. It doesn't matter, or we don't need to follow these guidelines anymore, or maybe not that we don't even need to. Just the guidelines are relaxed. All the states with spiking cases right now, they're red states who have governors that follow Trump and wanted their states opened up early because Trump wanted them open up early. The Republicans wanted, the Republican position was, we need to get our businesses back open no matter what the cost is. And that today is where you see states going up and cases going up. You know where you don't see cases going up is where there are places like New York, places like LA, places like Minnesota. I'm not hearing about massive amounts of cases going up in New York and Minnesota, at least as of yet. Those places that have had strict social distancing guidelines in place for a sensible amount of time and had protests where people were A, outside, and B, in large part wearing masks and keeping relative social distance. Granted, it wasn't perfect all the time, but if you look at those crowds, a lot of them are wearing masks. It has been a way of life because New York got hit hardest and got hit first. So people there, they have lost a lot more people and really felt the brunt of it. And a lot of part of it is because of initial negligence in New York, like we're talking about. So, yeah. Over the next few months or maybe years, who knows, the outbreak that metastasized in New York City will be responsible for